Hi everyone, welcome to the Bite Me Again presentation. I will go a bit deeper into Michael West's expertise and how many people he affected. Last week we talked about Levon Brooks and Kennedy Brewer, who were both presented in the Netflix documentary The Innocence Files. I was so furious when I watched the first 3 episodes and I wanted to know more about West, and furthermore, I just needed to know how many lives he ruined. I knew there have to be more than only Brewer and Brooks. So I started digging a bit, and it didn't take me very long, maybe 2 or 3 days, and I found 14 more people. So with Brewer and Brooks, 16 people, and I'm sure there are many, many more. I hope all West's cases get examined, each and every single one of them. But before I continue, I want to apologize in advance if I pronounce some words wrong. I'm sorry, and I really hope you will still understand what I meant to say. So, let's see what I can tell you about the famous narcissist, Mr. West. By his own estimate, West has appeared as an expert about 55 times in 9 states over the past dozen of years, at least a third to a half of which were capital murder cases. He says he lost his first bite mark case in 1983, but that he has not lost one at trial since, excluding any convictions reversed or appealed. But West's proclaimed expertise is not limited to bite marks. In fact, he created a comfy niche mostly as a prosecution expert, matching not only bite marks with teeth, but also wounds with weapons, shoes with footprints, and fingernails with scratches, even spills with stains. West's testimony has helped put dozens of defendants in prison, some for life, and at least 2 on death row. In defending his own objectivity, West says he does not see himself as either a prosecution or a defense expert, but as an expert for the truth. All told, he says, he has eliminated many more people as suspects than he has implicated. Sure. The Mississippi Supreme Court noted that in 1994, West has testified in 41 murder trials. Listen to this. 32 times as a wound pattern expert, 1 time as a trace metal expert, 3 times as an expert regarding gunshot residue, 3 times as an expert in gunshot reconstruction, 3 times as a death investigator expert, 2 times as a county coroner, 6 times in child abuse trials, 3 times as a crime scene investigator, and 1 time as a blood splatter expert. West asserts that he has made 600 dental IDs and 300 bite mark IDs. Of the 100 board-certified forensic odontologists in the United States, about 90% of them have testified for the opposite side when Dr. West is called as an expert witness. Christopher Plourd is a criminal defense attorney and a legal specialist in forensic science. He has served on several government commissions looking at the role of DNA testing in the criminal justice system. Christopher chose Michael West for a test. West had long been under fire for dubious testimony in dozens of criminal cases, including one in which he claimed to be able to match the bite marks in a half-eaten bologna sandwich found at the crime scene to the dentition of a defendant. Christopher selected West because even though the dentist was still active in the Mississippi and Louisiana courts, he had been suspended from the American Board of Forensic Odontology since the mid-1990s. In October 2001, working for Christopher Plourd, a private investigator named James Riggs sent West the decade-old photographs of the bite marks on a victim's breast. Riggs told West that the photos were from the 3-year-old unsolved murder of a college student in Idaho. Riggs then sent West a dental mold of his own teeth, but told him that they came from the chief suspect in the case. Of course, he also sent him a check for $750, which was West's retainer fee. 2 months later, West sent Riggs a letter and accompanying 20-minute video. In the video, West explains the methodology he uses to match bite marks to dental molds. Using the photo of the victim's bitten breasts and Riggs' own dental mold, West then reaches the conclusion Plourd and Riggs suspected he would. The mold and the photos were a definite match. And I quote, "Notice as I flex the photograph across these teeth, how it conforms to the outline very nicely," West explains confidently. I quote again, "The odds of that happening if this weren't the teeth that created this bite would be almost astronomical." West adds that the matching patterns he found between the photo and the dental mold could only lead an odontologist to the opinion that these teeth did create the mark. So West failed Plourd's test in 2001, yet as late as 2003, the Mississippi State Supreme Court still upheld West's bite mark testimony in a murder case, and as late as 2006, Mississippi District Attorney relied on West's bite mark testimony to keep rape and murder convict Kennedy Brewer in prison. What did they testify to that was incorrect? If they knew they didn't kill this child, and I never testified that they killed this child, where have I tortured them? This is what West said for 2 men who were convicted because of his testimony. It shows of his narcissistic nature. He never admitted any wrongdoing. He never apologized. He is a self-centered and ego-driven narcissist of the worst kind. Reading a deposition he gave in one of the cases just left me speechless. So let's go through the 16 cases where West played an important role. Henry Lee Harrison. In 1990, Henry Lee Harrison was convicted and sentenced to death for the 1989 rape and murder of a 7-year-old girl. Michael West testified that he had identified more than 41 bite marks covering the victim's body, all of which he said had been inflicted by Harrison, some while the girl was alive, some after she was dead. 2 other experts have examined the evidence later. One said the marks on the girl's body cannot be identified. The other said they probably were ant bites. Harrison's conviction and sentence were overturned in 1994 by the Mississippi Supreme Court. Thomas Aparri. In 1990, Michael West identified a footprint on a murdered girl's face in Jefferson Parish, outside of New Orleans, as having been made by an athletic shoe found in the apartment of the neighbor Thomas Aparri. Thomas, facing a possible death sentence, eventually entered a plea to manslaughter and was sentenced to 31 years in prison. Levon Brooks. We talked about Levon last week. Levon served 16 years in Mississippi prisons for a 1990 rape and murder of a 3-year-old girl he did not commit. In 2008, DNA testing cleared another man, Kennedy Brewer, who had been sentenced to death for a nearly identical murder that happened in the same town less than 2 years after the crime for which Brooks was convicted. The DNA results implicated the perpetrator of that crime, and he confessed to committing both murders, clearing Brooks. West took a sample of Brooks' teeth at the local jail. West testified at Brooks' trial that he compared Brooks' sample to the marks on the victim's body and found that 2 of Brooks' teeth matched the marks on the victim's body. He said Brooks made the marks with his 2 top front teeth. Mark Charles Opie. In 1990, West claimed he could definitely match scratches on a murder victim to the suspect's fingernails, not by DNA, but merely by the appearance of the scratches and the structure of the suspect's fingernails. Opie, who also was looking at a possible death sentence, agreed to a manslaughter plea that left him liable for parole in about 6 years. Larry Maxwell. In 1990, Larry Maxwell was convicted of a murder of 3 elderly victims. Michael West definitely matched the serrations on a butcher's knife to the stab wounds and with a slash on a door. West also claimed he could trace slight indentations on the suspect's palm to rivets on the knife's handle. When West's lab photos of the alleged indentations came back overexposed, he merely photocopied the suspect's hand, then drew the indentations in. He was still allowed to testify. West's testimony is all that linked Larry Maxwell to the crime scene. The court later overturned Maxwell's conviction. The state dropped the charges and Maxwell was freed. Anthony Kiko. On August 4, 1991, 52-year-old Louise Kiko was found shot and beaten to death in her home in Louisiana. Although police developed several possible suspects, the primary target of their investigation was Kiko's 62-year-old husband, Anthony. Anthony was arrested in 1992 and charged with capital murder. He went on trial in September 1993. The most powerful evidence against him was West's bite mark testimony. Listen to this. West claimed to have found a bite mark on the shoulder of a woman whose body was exhumed after being buried for 14 months. No other doctor had seen the mark. Unfortunately, West says he put the skin sample in a preservative that destroyed the mark he claimed to have found. He was allowed to testify anyway. Relying on West's memory and West's word, jurors convicted Anthony Kiko of killing his wife. Kiko served 2.5 years in prison before the state dropped all charges against him and set him free. Kiko filed a wrongful conviction lawsuit against West that was settled for an undisclosed amount. Patricia Van Winkle. In 1991, Michael West testified that marks on a dead boy's stomach were consistent with the soles of a pair of hiking boots owned by his mother. Van Winkle was convicted of manslaughter and received a 21-year sentence. The conviction was later overturned, in part due to West's testimony. Kennedy Plourd. We also talked about him last week. In 1992, Kennedy Plourd was arrested in Mississippi and accused of killing his girlfriend's 3-year-old daughter. After waiting in jail for 3 years for a trial to begin, Plourd was convicted of capital murder and sent to Mississippi death row. In 2001, DNA tests proved he did not commit the crime, leading his conviction to be overturned. The prosecutors said they intended to retry Plourd, so he remained in jail for over 5 more years until his release on bail in August 2007. In 2008, after an Innocence Project investigation led to an alternate suspect in the case, Plourd became the first person to be exonerated through post-conviction DNA testing in Mississippi. Michael West analyzed bite marks he claimed were found on the victim's body. West concluded that 19 marks found on the victim's body were indeed and without a doubt inflicted by Plourd. He further asserted that all 19 marks were made only by Plourd's top 2 teeth, and that somehow the bottom teeth had made no impression. Eddie Lee Howard Jr. In February 1992, firefighters who put out a smoldering fire in the living room of a Columbus, Mississippi house found Georgia Kemp lying dead on her bedroom floor and with a bloody butcher knife on her bed. An autopsy the next day concluded that she died of 2 stab wounds to the chest and suffered vaginal injuries. Kemp's body was exhumed 3 days after she was buried because, as the medical examiner put it, there was some question that she had been bitten, though he had not mentioned it in his autopsy report. 2 days later, based on a comparison of the impressions with bite marks supposedly detected by Michael West, police arrested Howard, who was black, for the rape and murder of Kemp, who was white. In the 1994 trial, the prosecution relied almost exclusively on the testimony of Dr. West, who proceeded to tell the jury that one of several bite marks that he had found on Kemp's body was a positive match to Howard's teeth. In 1997, the Mississippi Supreme Court reversed the conviction and remanded the case for a retrial. In Howard's retrial, West repeated his bite mark testimony, and Howard was again convicted and recommended a death sentence. In 2010, the Mississippi Supreme Court ordered the retesting of the butcher knife and Kemp's nightgown. The DNA testing found no DNA at the points on the nightgown where saliva would have been left had Kemp been bitten as described. The testing also excluded Howard as the source of male DNA on the handle of the butcher knife. In 2005, Howard requested to overturn his conviction based on the DNA results. The trial judge denied Howard's motion, and Howard remains on death row. Johnny Bourne. In 1992, West matched a bite mark on an elderly rape victim to Johnny. He was arrested and imprisoned for 18 months due to West's testimony, even though hair and fingerprint evidence pointed to someone else. Bourne was freed when DNA testing excluded him as an assailant. The charges were dropped. James Carroll. In 1993, a 17-year-old James Carroll was charged with manslaughter for deliberately pouring bleach onto his disabled sister. Michael West was able to get himself certified as an expert on liquid splash patterns and testified that the splash and burn patterns from the bleach showed the bleach had been poured intentionally, not spilled accidentally. James was found innocent. Kelvin Banks. In 1993, an 80-year-old lady was robbed and beaten to death. Michael West claimed to have matched the bites in a half-eaten bologna sandwich left at the crime scene to Kelvin Banks' dentition. West then destroyed the sandwich before the defense could test it. The defendant was convicted, but the conviction was later overturned and West's testimony was tossed. Jimmy Duncan. In 1993, Jimmy Duncan was convicted for the murder of 2-year-old Haley from Louisiana, based primarily on the testimony of Heine and Michael West. Duncan has admitted to leaving Haley in a bathtub unattended and was initially charged with negligent homicide. Heine examined Haley and claimed to have found bite marks on her face that had not been seen by any of the other medical professionals who had previously examined her body, such as EMTs and hospital personnel. After this, a mold was taken of Duncan's teeth for use in bite mark analysis by Michael West. In performing this analysis, West repeatedly pressed the mold into the cheek of Haley's corpse, creating bite marks which had not previously existed. This was recorded on videotape, which surfaced in 2008. Michael Bowers, Deputy Medical Examiner for Ventura County, California, commented with regard to the bite marks that, I quote, "Dr. West created them. It was intentional. He is creating artificial abrasions in that video and he's tampering with the evidence. It's criminal, regardless of what excuse he may come up with about his methods." The jury found Jimmy Duncan guilty as charged and sentenced him to death by lethal injection. James Earl Gates. In 1997, James Gates was arrested for capital murder. Gates' indictment rested merely on the match between a bite mark found on the victim and Gates' teeth. Dr. Stephen Heine, the medical examiner, claimed to have found bite marks on the victim while conducting an autopsy, and Michael West confirmed the marks were bites and concluded that they matched Gates' dentition. While awaiting trial, 10 months later, DNA test excluded James Gates from a profile obtained through scrapings from the victim's fingernails. Prosecutors dismissed the case. Lee Stoops and Tammy Vance. In 2001, Lee Stoops and Tammy Vance were convicted on aggravated assault for beating of Janet Kimberly Williams. The incident happened at a Brookhaven hotel. One of the most striking part of the trial was the testimony of Michael West, a supposed forensic dentist who was known to provide false testimony. The Lincoln County District Attorney's Office asked Michael West to examine Williams for possible evidence of being sexually assaulted. West videotaped and photographed the injuries on Williams' breasts and right hip and reported to the prosecutor that Williams had a bite mark on her right hip. West concluded that Stoops likely made the bite mark on Williams' hip. West also told the prosecution that although he had not seen any head injury on Williams during his first visit, on the second visit he found 3 wounds on her head. West went to the Brookhaven Police Department, where he viewed a surveillance video from the Comfort Inn. West would later testify that he subsequently enhanced the video on his home computer and determined that he saw Stoops pull a body of a woman with dark hair out of a large toolbox in the back of Stoops' truck. West then examined the truck, which had been impounded. He asked a detective to remove one of the 2 latches on the toolbox. He later concluded that one latch was responsible for the wounds on Williams' head. Stoops and Vance were both sentenced to 44 years for the assault charge and several drug-related convictions. In August 2008, the FBI responded to a Freedom of Information Act request filed by Stoops' father, Alfred, requesting any documents relating to any analysis performed on their surveillance video from the Comfort Inn. The FBI reported that the prosecution has submitted the video, but that, in contrast to West's testimony, FBI analysts only saw 1 person in the video, not 2, and they could not say what that single person was doing. The FBI analysts could not tell what was being removed from the truck, and were certain that it was not a body, as West testified. In 2011, Stoops and Vance, represented by the Mississippi Innocence Project, filed a petition for post-conviction review. The petition claimed the convictions should be set aside because West presented false evidence and because the prosecution had failed to disclose the results of the FBI analysis of the surveillance video. In 2012, Judge granted the petition, vacated the convictions of Stoops and Vance, and ordered a new trial. In 2012, nearly 11 years after they were convicted, Stoops and Vance were released on bond pending a retrial. In 2013, Stoops and Vance pled no contest to a charge of possession of morphine and were sentenced to time served. The prosecution dismissed the remaining charges. So, we made it to the end. It is unbelievable how one person's opinion can affect so many people's lives. I can understand why Michael West was so popular with the prosecutors. His way of talking is so very convincing, and it makes sense why the jury believed him in so many different cases. Cases presented here are just a few of Michael West's cases. There must be many, many more. I really hope the Innocence Project will go over each and single one of them and hopefully uncover more innocent people Michael West helped put in prison. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. I hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.